I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had gone downstairs to get my cardigan, the cream one I'd left on the back of the kitchen chair that morning. My daughter-in-law was on the back porch. The sliding door cracked open just enough to carry her voice through the laundry room, through the hallway, right to where I was standing in my socks on the cold tile. She was talking to her sister. I could tell by the way she laughed, that loose, easy laugh she never used around me. She just sits there, she said, all day, in that chair, like she's waiting for someone to ask her something. A pause. Her sister said something I couldn't catch. I know, but Daniel won't say anything. You know how he is with her. Another pause. It's like living with a houseplant that needs watering but doesn't do anything. I stood very still. The cardigan was right there on the chair, 3 feet from me. I looked at it for a moment, then turned around and walked back upstairs. I didn't take it with me. I wasn't cold anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the window. The maple in the backyard had gone half orange already, the way it always did in October. I'd watched it turn every fall for 3 years from this window. This was the 3rd autumn I'd spent in this room, the room they called the guest room, even though I paid for the addition that built it. My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old. I was a high school English teacher for 31 years in Dayton, Ohio. I raised my son, Daniel, mostly alone after his father left when Daniel was 9. I worked 2 jobs the summer he turned 16 so he could go to a soccer camp in North Carolina that he still talks about at dinner parties. I co-signed his first car loan. I sent him money without being asked during the year after the wedding when he and my daughter-in-law were getting on their feet. And last Tuesday, while I was standing in my own kitchen, the kitchen I designed the layout for, the kitchen with the wide window over the sink that I specifically requested because I have always believed that a person should be able to look at something living while they wash dishes. I heard myself described as a houseplant. The thing about a moment like that is it doesn't land all at once. It settles in layers, slow, like dust after something's been moved. I sat on that bed for a long time. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked 2 houses down. The maple branch closest to the window tapped lightly against the glass, the way it always did when the wind came from the east. I thought about the curtains. They're white with small blue flowers. I brought them from my apartment in Kettering when I moved in 3 years ago after my knee replacement made the stairs there impossible. I'd hung them myself on a Saturday morning while Daniel was at his golf league. My daughter-in-law had come in later, looked at them for a moment, said, "Oh, those are sweet." The way you describe a child's drawing. The way you'd talk about something you'd already decided not to keep. The curtains are still there, but a month after I moved in, she replaced every other window treatment in the house with linen panels in a color she called warm grage. She left mine. I understood after a while that leaving mine was not kindness. It was containment. I had not planned to stay this long. When my knee gave out and the 3 flights at the Kettering apartment became impossible, Daniel called on a Sunday night. His voice warm, certain, the way it gets when he's already made a decision he wants you to agree with. "Mom, just come here for a while. Just until your PT is done and you feel steady." My daughter-in-law got on the line too, which surprised me. "We'd love to have you, Margaret," she said. "Truly." I gave up my apartment. I had paid $940 a month for it, and I loved it in the specific way you love a place that is entirely yours. The basil on the windowsill, the quilt folded over the reading chair, the small rituals of a life arranged to suit exactly one person. I gave it up because my son said come, and I believed him. The first few months were fine. I cooked Sunday dinners. I helped my granddaughter Nora with her reading. I was careful not to take up too much of the living room, careful to ask before I changed the channel, careful to be pleasant and easy and grateful. I became, without noticing it, the kind of guest who tries very hard not to seem like a guest. Then slowly, the way these things always happen, slowly, The edges of my life in that house got smaller. My opinion stopped being asked about dinner. My granddaughter Nora started spending more time in her room when her parents were home. Less time in the kitchen with me. The Sunday dinners became, "We were thinking of just ordering pizza tonight, Mom." My daughter-in-law started buying a brand of coffee I didn't drink and stopped buying the kind I did. Small things. The kind of things that are too small to say out loud. The kind that accumulate in your chest like sediment until you can't quite breathe all the way down. I still made myself useful. That was the word I used in my own head. Useful. I drove Nora to her Tuesday violin lessons because my daughter-in-law's work schedule had gotten complicated. I took in the mail, sorted it, left it stacked neatly on the entryway table. I kept the guest bathroom spotless without being asked. I started waking up 20 minutes earlier than I needed to make sure the dishwasher was unloaded before anyone else came downstairs, so no one would have to do it, so no one would have any reason to feel inconvenienced by my being there. I was 68 years old and I was waking up early to prove I deserved my space. I didn't let myself think about that too directly for a long time. After the cardigan moment, I started paying closer attention. Not to eavesdrop, just to understand. I noticed that when my daughter-in-law talked about the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, she said "we" in a way that included Daniel and Nora and did not seem to include me. I noticed that when I offered to watch Nora on the Saturday they had a wedding to attend, my daughter-in-law said, "Oh, we actually already asked Chelsea." Chelsea being the 22-year-old down the street, and then added quickly, "We didn't want to bother you." I noticed that the door to the living room, which had always been open, had started being closed in the evenings. I noticed that my son had stopped coming to find me after dinner to talk the way he used to. I noticed that I had stopped being a person in this house and started being a fact of it, like the water heater. Necessary, possibly, but not considered. One evening I asked Daniel, quietly, while his wife was putting Nora to bed, whether everything was okay, whether there was anything I should know about. He looked at me with something that was almost discomfort. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been asked a question in a language they used to speak fluently and have since let go unused. "Everything's fine, Mom," he said. "Why?" "I just want to make sure I'm not in the way." He said, "You're not in the way," and looked back at the television. I said goodnight and went upstairs and sat with my journal for a while without writing anything in it. There was a half-finished letter to my college roommate Karen on the desk, 3 weeks old. I hadn't found the right words for how to describe what my life felt like these days. I still hadn't. The phone call I made 3 weeks after the cardigan was to my financial advisor, a careful, quiet man named Robert who had managed my retirement account since I was 52. I called him from my car, parked 2 blocks away while I was supposed to be at the pharmacy. I told him I was thinking about my options. He was quiet for a moment. "Margaret," he said, "you still have the property in Granger." I did. My mother's house. A small Victorian on Elm Street in Granger, Indiana, 2.5 hours from where I was sitting in my car. She'd left it to me when she died 4 years ago. I hadn't been able to sell it. Couldn't bring myself to, in those first 2 years of grief. And then my knee happened. And then I was here. The house had been rented to a young couple, a steady $1,200 a month going directly into my savings, which I had barely touched. "I know," I said. "Have you thought about what you want to do with it?" I looked out through the windshield at the October street. Someone's dog was pulling at a leash. A woman was raking leaves into a bag that kept tipping. "I'm starting to," I said. "I want to tell you about the party because that is where the sediment finally shifted. My daughter-in-law's name is Renee. She turned 40 in November. Daniel had been planning something for weeks. I knew because I heard fragments, hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. A guest list left face down on the counter that she picked up quickly when I walked in. I assumed I would be included. not at the center of things. I understood I was not the center of things, but included, present, invited to sit at the edge of the celebration of my son's wife's 40th birthday. The invitation went out on a Friday. Nora mentioned it at breakfast, innocently, the way 9-year-olds mention things. "Mommy said 50 people are coming," she said, pouring cereal. "She said we're gonna have a photo booth." "That sounds fun," I said. "Are you going to wear your good blouse?" I looked at her. "Am I invited, honey?" Nora looked at her bowl. "I don't know," she said in the careful voice children use when they have already been told something they don't want to repeat. I said, "It's okay. Eat your breakfast." I did not ask Renee. I did not ask Daniel. I went to the grocery store that afternoon and I bought the things I needed and I came home and put them away and I made dinner and I sat at the table with my family and I was pleasant and I passed the bread and I asked Nora about her violin lesson and I said goodnight to everyone at 8:30. And I went upstairs. I closed my bedroom door. I sat at my desk. I opened the drawer where I kept important papers and I took out the folder I've been adding to for the past 3 years. My mother's deed, the rental agreement for the Granger house, my own financial statements, the lease I'd kept from the Kettering apartment, a folder that had become, without my consciously making it one, a record of what I still owned and what still belonged to me. I read through all of it slowly. Then I called Robert again. "Tell me what it would take to get the Granger house ready," I said. He told me. The tenant's lease was up at the end of December. If I wanted the house back, I gave 60 days notice and it was mine by January. There would be repairs. The kitchen needed updating, but the bones were solid. My mother had kept it solid. "And the financials?" I asked. "You're comfortable, Margaret. You know that. You have always been comfortable." I had always been comfortable. I had made careful choices for 30 years because I knew that comfort did not come by accident. And I had worked 31 years in a public school, and I knew exactly what careful looked like. I had been comfortable, and I had given much of my comfort away. And I had told myself that was what mothers did. And I had believed it until I was sitting in a house I had partially financed, listening to a party being planned around my absence. "Give the notice," I said. "End of October." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I'll handle it," he said. I did not tell Daniel. I did not tell Renee. I told no one. What I did instead was begin, quietly, to sort. I started with the closet in my room. I had more than I remembered. 30 years of a life compressed into boxes and garment bags, and the kind of accumulated tenderness that comes from keeping things not because you need them, but because they contain a version of yourself you don't want to forget. My mother's handmade quilt, folded in the cedar chest I'd brought from Kettering. The green wool coat I bought myself the year I made department head. A box of my students' letters, actual letters, handwritten, from 30 years of teenagers who had taken the time to write to tell me I had mattered. I read a few of those letters. I sat on the floor of my room and read them. I had mattered enormously to a great many people for a very long time. I had just, in recent years, mistaken a small house in Ohio for the whole of the world. November passed. Renee's party happened on a Saturday. I took Nora to the aquarium that day. Just the two of us, her idea. She'd asked the week before whether we could go sometime, and I had said yes immediately. We spent 4 hours there. She held my hand in the shark tunnel. She ate half my pretzel. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the back seat and I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in, watching the last light on the windshield. Not wanting to move yet, we came home to the house full of guests. Music, laughter, the warm clatter of people who were glad to be together. Renee saw Nora first, swept her up, carried her through the crowd. She looked at me briefly over Nora's shoulder. "Thanks," she said, distracted, already turning away. I smiled. I went upstairs. I did not cry. There was nothing left in that direction. December moved the way Decembers do, too fast and too heavy at once. I kept sorting. Box by box, shelf by shelf, I was slowly packing a life back into the shape of itself. I was careful. I did not rush. I waited for the January date like I was waiting for a tide to turn. The last week of December, Daniel found one of my boxes in the hallway. He stopped and looked at it. I had labeled it in my own handwriting. Books, Granger. He looked at me. Mom, he said. What is this? I'm moving back to your grandmother's house in January, I said. The tenants are gone. It's ready. He stared at me for a moment with an expression I recognized. It was the same one he'd had at 9 years old when I told him his father wasn't coming back. Not anger? Disorientation, like the floor had shifted. What are you talking about? You can't. The house needs work. I've had it assessed. The kitchen's being updated in the second week of January. When did you plan this? October, I said. He sat down on the bottom stair. Not because he was invited to. He just sat down. Mom, why didn't you say something? If you're unhappy, you should have told us. We could have. I'm not unhappy, Daniel. That was true. I was, at that moment, calmer than I had been in 3 years. I'm just going home. This is your home? I looked at him carefully. I thought about the party. I thought about Chelsea. I thought about warm greige linen panels and a coffee brand I didn't drink, and the particular quality of being thanked for folding laundry the way you'd thank a polite stranger. I thought about all the things I had not said in 3 years because I loved my son and I did not want to make difficulty. I know you believe that, I said. I don't need you to understand. I need you to help me move the cedar chest on Saturday. He didn't help me move the cedar chest. He spent the next 4 days trying to talk me out of it, and Renee was suddenly very warm and very sorry and very full of explanations about how busy they had been and how they had never meant to make me feel excluded. She used the phrase, feel excluded, 3 times in one conversation. The careful way people use language when they mean to acknowledge something without quite admitting it. I listened. I said, I know. I did not change my plans. What I remember most about moving day is the light. It was January 7th, a Tuesday. Cold but clear, the particular blue sky cold that makes everything look certain. My friend Gloria from the Dayton Library Book Club drove up with her SUV and we loaded what was mine, and there was more than I'd thought. More than 3 years of shrinking had allowed me to see clearly, because apparently I had kept myself small, but my life had not entirely complied. I left the curtains, the white ones with the blue flowers. I thought about it, standing in the doorway of my room for the last time, and decided they could stay. Not as a gift, just because I no longer needed them to prove something. I left a note on the kitchen table. Not dramatic. Not long. Just, I've gone home. The Granger address is in the address book, second drawer. Nora is welcome anytime. I love you both. Mom. The drive was 2.5 hours. Gloria talked the first hour and then fell quiet in the comfortable way of someone who has known you long enough to understand what kind of silence you need. The fields in Indiana in January are flat and pale and very still. I watched them pass and felt with each mile the particular loosening that comes when you stop pretending a thing is fine. The house on Elm Street smelled like my mother. I stood in the entry for a full minute before I could move. Old wood, lemon oil, the ghost of every pie she'd ever baked, the particular warmth of a house that knows it is a home. The kitchen was half done. The contractor had pulled the old counters, but the new ones weren't installed yet. But my mother's kitchen table was still there, sturdy and round, 4 chairs, the same chairs she'd had since 1987. I set my purse on the table. Gloria set down a box. We looked at each other. Coffee? She said. God, yes, I said. We sat at my mother's table on folding chairs with bad instant coffee from a thermos and talked for 2 hours while the winter light moved across the floor. Gloria told me about a ceramics class she'd started in the fall. I told her about the rental income, About Robert? About October in the car? I told her about Nora at the aquarium, the shark tunnel, the pretzel. She sounds like you, Gloria said. She is, I said. That's why I'm leaving her something to remember. That night, alone, I made a real list. Not of grievances, of intentions. I would finish the kitchen. I would plant something in the back garden come March, late winter vegetables, the kind my mother always started from seed in the window over the sink. I would go back to the book club I'd let lapse when I moved to Dayton. I would write Taryn the letter I'd been trying to write for months. I would take the trip to Asheville I had been putting off since 2019. I would, above all, stop measuring my worth by how little I asked for. Daniel called on a Thursday, 10 days after I moved. His voice was different. Less certain, more like the boy I knew. Are you okay? He said. I'm very okay, I said. A pause. The house looks empty. Houses change when people leave them, I said. That's how you know someone was really there. He didn't say anything for a moment. Nora keeps asking about you, he said. She wants to know if you're going to teach her to make your biscuits. She can come any weekend she wants. I'll have the ingredients ready. Mom. A longer pause. I'm sorry. I think I let some things happen that I should have paid more attention to. I sat with that for a moment. It was not a full accounting. It was not everything I might have wanted him to say. But it was real, and it was his. And I had known this man since before he could walk, and I knew the difference between when he was performing remorse and when he was feeling it. I know, I said. I love you. I love you too. Come for Easter, I said. All of you. He said he would. Nora came the second weekend of February, just her. Daniel dropped her off on Saturday morning and she stood on my porch with her overnight bag and her violin case and looked at the house with wide eyes like she was arriving somewhere she'd heard about in a story. It smells different here, she said, coming inside. Good different or bad different? She thought about it with the seriousness 9-year-olds bring to important questions. Like a library, she said. And like outside. That's the right answer, I said. We baked biscuits. She got flour on her cheek and did not wipe it off for 40 minutes. We played Scrabble after dinner, and she challenged every word over 6 letters, even when they were correct, and laughed every time she lost a challenge. At bedtime, she asked me to read to her, and I did. For an hour, the way I used to when she was small, and she fell asleep with her hand curled open on the pillow, the way children do when they feel completely safe. I sat in the chair beside her bed for a while after her breathing slowed. I thought about the word that my daughter-in-law had used, houseplant. I thought about what a houseplant actually is. Something alive that grows toward light, that asks for very little, that changes the quality of the air in a room simply by being present, that keeps reaching even when no one's watching. I thought that she had meant it as an insult and that I was no longer inclined to receive it as one. I was a houseplant in the way that anything persistent and living is a houseplant. I had been growing quietly for 68 years. I had been purifying the air in rooms that didn't thank me for it. But I was in my own room now, my own air. My own window, with my mother's garden just outside it, waiting for March. I went downstairs and made tea. I stood at the kitchen window while the water boiled and looked out at the backyard, at the flat Indiana January, at the old apple tree in the far corner that had been there since my childhood and would probably outlast everything I had ever worried about. When the tea was ready, I carried it to the table and sat down in my mother's chair and opened my journal to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote the date. Below it, I wrote, I am not a houseplant, I am the gardener. Then I sat quietly in my own house and drank my tea and listened to my granddaughter breeze upstairs, and the heater ticked, and the old tree stood in the yard. And everything was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand or complicated way, just in the quiet, practical way that comes when you finally have enough distance to see a thing clearly. The way I lived in that house for 3 years was not something that happened to me all at once. It happened in small steps, each one so reasonable on its own that I let it pass without naming it. My chair moved from the living room, my plants moved behind the shed, my coffee disappeared from the grocery list. My name dropped off the invitation. None of those things alone would have been enough to make a person leave. But they were never alone. They were a pattern. And patterns, if you let them run long enough, become the shape of your life. I think about Daniel, my son, who I raised alone and loved without condition, who became a good man in most of the ways that count, and who looked me in the eye when I asked if everything was okay and said everything's fine, Mom, because it was easier than looking at what had been slowly happening in his own house. I don't think he meant harm. I've known Daniel long enough to know the difference between cruelty and carelessness, and what I lived with those 3 years was carelessness. That almost makes it harder. Cruelty has an edge you can push against. Carelessness just absorbs you, quietly until you look up and realize you've become part of the furniture. I think about Renee too. I have no anger left for her. What I have is something more like clarity. She called me a houseplant, because that was how she had come to see me, something present, passive, requiring maintenance but not consideration. And the thing is, I had let that happen. Not because I was weak, because I was trying, every single day, to keep the peace in a house where my presence was already on trial, trying to take up less space, trying to be grateful enough. That is not weakness, but it is a kind of forgetting, a slow forgetting of your own outline, until you can no longer find where you end and the accommodation begins. What I know now is this. The way you allow yourself to be treated becomes, over time, the instruction manual other people use. I handed Renee that manual one quiet nod at a time. I handed it to Daniel every time I said, "I'm fine," instead of the true thing. Not because I was foolish, because I loved him and I wanted things to work, and I kept believing that if I just made myself a little smaller, a little easier, a little less inconvenient, the warmth would come back on its own. It didn't. Warmth does not come back on its own. It has to be chosen, deliberately, by people who are paying attention. Nora is paying attention. That child, 9 years old, asking me at breakfast whether I had been invited, already understanding, in the instinctive way children understand what adults refuse to name, that something was wrong. She is the one I think about most when I ask myself whether leaving was the right thing. And every time, the answer is the same, yes. Because the version of me that stayed would have had less and less to give her. The version of me that left has a kitchen table and a garden and a whole long January afternoon to teach her how to make biscuits without once checking whether she was taking up too much space. That is the thing about finally choosing yourself. It is not a selfish act. It is, in the end, the most honest gift you can give the people who actually see you.